has to influence resource allocation and ensure protection of priorities in this era of fiscal consolidation. In humility, dear Jesus, this is our prayer of faith.
Amen. Lucky Kisaka is the head of experience at IPF. IPF is the Institute of Public Finance. Thank you so much for joining us once more. And without further ado, it is my honor to introduce to you our esteemed country lead. His name is Daniel Ndirango, who is going to be taking us through the official opening remarks. Let's give him a clap as he comes.
All right. Thank you. And good morning, our chief guest, the MP Teso South, and Vice Chair of Budget and Appropriations Committee, Honorable Mary Emase. We have distinguished guests, partners and esteemed colleagues, the members of Fourth Estate, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This has been the culture and the pattern of IPF for the last 4 years. We are gathered here today to discuss the key priorities for the next financial year for the government. And we are looking this with anticipation under the banner of the Institute of Public Finance, led by our CEO, James Moraguri, to unveil the 4th edition of the annual shadow budget. This is a pivotal step for us and a journey towards fiscal responsibility, our principles of transparency and visionary governance. This product is a process of unabated advocacy that IPF has previously conducted. And we thought perhaps it will be better for us to present more options and alternatives that the government can consider beyond just saying this is not right, the other one is wrong, this need to have happened. So we preempt this discussion ahead of the submission of the budget estimates before Parliament by April 30th. So this is today 16th, so there's about 14 days before the document is submitted before the House for discussion. And we thought this becomes a proper tool for Parliament to use to debate key priorities, to use it as a tool to consider government budget performance and what will be considered as key priorities in the next financial year. So as we embark in this endeavor, we reflect this document today not merely as a compilation of numbers from our team of experts, but rather it's a manifestation of our commitment to crafting a roadmap to equitable growth, sustainable development, and inclusive prosperity, which is the desire by most of us here today. So in a world where every decision carries profound implication, the formulation of the budget is an exercise in foresight, looking into the future and a manifestation of pragmatism. You are planning so that you do not fail. Otherwise, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail, as the popular quote goes. So we are looking at it as a testament of our collective resolve to address the challenges of our time and seize opportunities that lie ahead. So there are many challenges today, even as you peruse through your social media or mainstream. You will see an ongoing conference on wage bill because there's a crisis on wage bill. There is the doctor strike that is going on. There is the public debt that has also become a thorn in the flesh. So all these crises need to be considered in a very pragmatic way. And that is what we are trying to present today, what the budget would look like should the government consider all the alternatives that we've provided. So we look at details of our shadow budget in the next few minutes, but we want us to remember that this is more than a theoretical exercise, but it also reflects the values and priorities and our aspirations as a society. It's a blueprint of a better future. And we believe that is characterized by a lot of innovation, resilience, and building a society that has social justice. So I extend my gratitude to all those who have contributed to the development of this shadow budget, from the policymakers, economists, our partners who are here today that also came in during the discussions on key priorities, community leaders, and different members of our country. So your insights and experience that you've provided and dedication has been instrumental in shaping the vision for the future. Lastly, we embrace, today we reaffirm our commitment and preparedness for foresight and responsible governance, and together we embrace the challenges that lie ahead and chart a course towards a brighter tomorrow. We thank you all, and karibuni sana.
Thank you so much, Daniel Ndirango, and thank you so much once more for joining us. Before we proceed, I would want to let us know that we have those that are joining us online, and we request that as we continue, we know we are going to get insights from this engagement. Our hashtag online is hashtag ANSB2024. I repeat, ANSB2024. And hashtag public finance management. So in an event where you get something that you can share with your followers, with your contacts, please feel free and tag us. As you tag us, our handle on X is IPF_global. On Facebook, it's at Institute of Public Finance. And then on LinkedIn at Institute of Public Finance. Please, when you're commenting, when you're sharing, please remember to tag us, and we will surely retweet and tweet your posts. Thank you. To take us to the next level, we are all aware that we are launching the annual Shadow Budget 2024. And to take us to the next level, we want to invite the experts who were behind this report to come and take us through the debt dynamics, the sectoral nuances, and the shape of our fiscal landscape. Please join me in welcoming Ruth Kendagor. She's the head of research, and she's also going to lead the team that was behind this report. Karibu, Ruth. You can give her a clap as she comes. As we put it up, we're encouraging that we continue sharing with our contacts. The theme for today is budgeting in an era of fiscal consolidation, protecting key priorities. Thank you so much. Take it to the floor.
Our distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, partners, and our good friends from the media, good morning. Good morning once again. How is your mood today? Can I see some smiles? Can I see a grin? Because this is our day and we are happy to be here. We want to make the most of this day, and I do pray, trust, and believe that each and every one of us is going to have a lovely morning today. So I take the honor and the pleasure to introduce the annual National Shadow Budget, one of our 3 flagship products that we produce on an annual basis. And before I say what the shadow budget is and why we analyze this, allow me to take a step back, to just take a minute to say who we are as an institute, what we do, what thematic areas we work in, and what other reports or materials you can access from our website. IPF, the Institute of Public Finance, is a non-profit independent think tank that works in the public finance management landscape. Our driving mantra is to navigate the dynamic PFM landscape. We do this through research, technical assistance to state and non-state actors, and advocacy, providing evidence to inform decision-making in public finance management. Currently, we have work in Kenya and Ethiopia. Our vision is to see a Kenya where all the core principles of public finance management are realized. These principles are enshrined in our constitution as well as our legal framework. Our mission acknowledges that there are other actors within the space, and in this space we seek to be the preeminent think tank that contributes to this work through research, capacity building, advocacy, and continuous improvement of Kenya's public finances. Some of the values that bring us together as a family and hold us together include diversity, equity and inclusion, integrity and accountability, courage to speak, including the courage to be here today, relevance and innovation. Our work as an institute is structured within 4 thematic areas. Within these areas, we explore the different issues, the different policies, the frameworks that support implementation of public finance management. Our work revolves around climate financing, ring-fencing resources for climate action, health financing, looking at policy implementation and resource mobilization and allocation for healthcare, macro-fiscal and debt analysis, which is the core framework within which our shadow budget is presented today, and revenue policy that looks at how revenue frameworks, tax policies, on-source revenue generation mechanisms are implemented in the country, and what reforms can be done to improve. Specifically now to the annual national shadow budget, which is one of our 3 flagship products. Our other flagship products are the macro-fiscal analytic snapshot, which was released in January, is available on our website. And the 3rd flagship product that we will be releasing in the 3rd quarter of this year, the annual state of public finance management. The annual national shadow budget takes a reflection of government's budget performance in the past years and also scrutinizes the forward-looking priorities and spending agenda as dictated or as presented in the 2024 budget policy statement. In analyzing these documents, we look at the trends that have been there in terms of budget allocation execution. We look at alignment between government priorities and resource allocation. And importantly, we raise key questions and flag off key gaps that we call upon actors in the space, the executive arm of government, the legislative, and all actors, especially people working within the oversight space, to ask and demand for answers in these questions. We believe that in putting forth such information, we are able to provide credible evidence for all actors to put together concerted efforts to demand and hold for accountability in the use of our resources. And so in preparing the 2024-2025 shadow budget, we reviewed the past budgets. We consulted widely with sector experts. We analyzed past performance, both financial and non-financial indicators. And then we flagged off specific programs with inefficiencies, redundancies, and duplications, which we believe that if these are addressed, as we are working towards an era of fiscal consolidation, then we'll be able to free up resources to invest in the key priority areas, while at the same time ensuring that in all sectors across government, resource utilization is optimized. We raise critical questions related to the 2024-2025 budget that is coming up within the next few months, and we do hope and believe that the information we provide will be critical, especially at this stage when we're working on budget formulation. And so I will welcome my colleagues, our senior research analysts, Veronica Ndegwa and Bernard Jiri, who will now lead us through the macro outlook that shapes the budget process in Kenya, especially for the coming year 2024-25. And they will take us through a deep dive of the sector allocations and what we found from our analysis. And then a chapter that looks at fiscal decentralization, resource transfers to the county governments, on-source revenue to the county governments, and county expenditures, and raise some of the key messages that we'd like to put forth from our this year's report. Karibu sana Bernard to start us off.
Thanks, Ruth. Our distinguished guests, partners, colleagues, and members of the fourth estate, good morning. Happy this morning to take you through our budget for the financial year 2023-2024. Like Ruth has indicated, I will be talking through those areas that we feel we can target and free up resources that can be used in key programs, especially at this time when we are walking the path of fiscal consolidation. It's a tight path. There will be casualties, but those casualties should not be the vulnerable. This year, or the coming year, 24-25, the budget is set to increase by 4%, but that does not necessarily mean all the sectors and all the programs will benefit from the 4% because of the fiscal consolidation. And that will actually inform us on how government is aligned with its commitments, in policy commitments, and the priorities that we see in the 2024 BPS. Can we see the government walking the talk as per the BPS settings? So looking at how the change is coming, comparing the approved budget in 23-24 and 24-25, it's evident that a significant part of our budget will go towards debt servicing because of the increase in CFS. So does it mean that we will have poor programs being prioritized by the government? Or how do we expect in terms of social spending? It's something that is of much concern. But before I proceed further, I would like us to see this picture here and just think what's off about, for example, the first picture. Just one answer. What's off? We have a baby there, but sorry? Yes, the baby is not protected. Yes, the baby is exposed. And that's the responsibility that we have today to protect the vulnerable. You have to play the big brother or the big sister. Parliament is an institution that we heavily rely on when it comes to protecting us because they have the powers, they have the oversight law. So we would really like Parliament to protect us in the coming year by playing the oversight law in budget implementation. Who is being protected by this budget? How about the second picture? What is off? Yes, sure. You have the resources, but those resources can only be meaningful depending on how you place them. We have the budget that is coming, but how it will impact us as a country will depend on the kind of allocations, the kind of choices that we make. So this year, there is a projected slowdown in the global economy to 2.9%. Last year, it was 3%. But the Kenyan economy is expected to remain relatively stable with a projected growth of 5.5%, mainly because the agriculture sector is rebounding. And the government is, we will have some space because of the currency appreciation that we have seen. that will create some space because of easing of the debt pressure. But at the same time, remember we have domestic and external factors that pose significant risk that are likely to slow down the Kenyan economic growth. For example, we have commodity prices. Yes, they are gradually coming down, but the cost of living still remains high because of these high commodity prices. We have borrowing costs that remain elevated. You know, the tightening of monetary policy is still on, and that makes even external borrowing so costly for our government. We have also seen internally how domestic borrowing has gone up. Government issuing debt instruments that attract interest rates that are as high as 16%. Then we have alarming growth of non-performing loans, and that will definitely slow down the momentum of the private sector, because banks will continue to tighten borrowing, lending terms, and we have also seen that coming as a result of the monetary pressure being tightened by the central bank. At the same time, we also have high cost of production, increased tax burden, and high pending bills. The private sector has severally raised the issue of the tax burden, and the pending bills has remained a challenge because it's constraining the financial flows for the private sector. Many suppliers have not been paid, so it's a concern that could also impact the economy. Now that the borrowing space has really shrunk or constrained, what it means is that implementation of the 24-25 budget will largely depend on revenue performance. We have to do something in terms of resource mobilization, you know, because there is no need of passing a huge budget that will not be implemented because of issues like delays in exchequer releases. So revenue is an issue of much interest in as far as the coming budget is concerned. But historically, we have seen KRA miss targets. As of February this year, KRA had collected 1.4 trillion tax revenue against a target of 2.5 trillion. So that's a percentage of 49%. We only have 4 months towards the close of the financial year. Can we correct 51% in 4 months? Technically impossible. So even this year, KRI will miss the revenue target. How about next year? So that's why it's also an issue of concern. And it's also a concern how KRA will implement the medium-term revenue strategy and the national tax policy, and how now those will help us in mobilizing resources now that it has proved not really effective. The stringent measures that were taken or that were introduced through the Finance Act 2023. Now let's look at how resources have been allocated. We have gainers, like I said, and we also have casualties that will have budget cuts. In this figure, I have shown percentage change. We take the 2024 BPS savings, we compare with supplementary budget 1 for 23-24. Yes, we are talking about fiscal consolidation. We are going through tough times. We would maybe expect social spending to be prioritized, but it's clear national security, payer, and health are some of the key areas that have been prioritized. Why national security? In the BPS, there is a huge increase in development budget in national security. But remember, this is a hard to audit sector, national security, but it has the highest change, the highest increase. Then we have pair. At the pair, that's where we have the Executive Office of the President. The Executive Office of the President is receiving 9.8 billion in nominal terms. That 9.8 billion is larger than what the health sector is gaining, 8 billion. So where is the priority and why one office should get such a huge increase compared to a whole sector? This is really concerning, especially when you look at the 2024-25 allocations, where, you know, we do not even have an allocation for the leasing of medical equipment. So if it happens that the Ministry of Health will pay the 7 billion we have been paying for the lease of medical equipment, so that technically means the health sector will have gained only 1 billion, because 7 billion, you know, if it goes to the leasing of medical equipment, then what does that mean? Then the casualties are the sectors that are having huge budget cuts compared to what they were allocated in supplemented budget 1. GECA, where we have MSMEs, where we have youth programs, where we have women fund, etc., is set to experience a budget cut of 1.5 billion. The agriculture sector, that is agriculture, rural and urban development, is set to have a budget cut of 10 billion, education slashed by 23 billion. Remember the challenges that we have in the education sector, you know, the rolling out of the CBC, issues to do with higher education financing, but we have a budget cut of 23 billion. It's really shocking. When we look at sector-specific issues, the total budget for the health sector in 24-25 will be 147 billion, going by the BPS ceilings. But when we reflect back how the sector has been performing, you know, we created 2 state departments, the State Department for Medical Services and the State Department for Public Health and Professional Standards. But by the time those 2 state departments were being created, it was not really clear what, you know, each department should be doing. So it ended up having the State Department for Public Health and Professional Standards only absorbing 38% of the budget that was allocated. So that definitely compromises service delivery, you know, in such a very critical sector. Then there were issues that we raised previously in the budget when we were releasing the previous version, but what we have realized again is that there is a very slow response by the government to issues that are being raised, especially on budget execution and the issue of pending bills. They continue to accumulate. Then development budget for the health sector, you know, still lags behind compared to recurrent expenditure. And when you look critically at the different budget documents, we realize we have huge disparity in program spending, especially the State Department for Medical Services and the State Department for Public Health and Professional Standards. But when we look at how the resources have been broken down, it's clear there is a kind of a shift where the government is, you know, tilting towards preventive and primary health care with increased funding for community health programs. But that still is not sufficient with only a budget increase of 8 billion. We have so many competing needs in the health sector. Currently, we have a doctor's strike. Kenyans are suffering. Then we have a budget cut, a budget increase of 8% for the 8 billion for the health sector, and we still want to cover the vulnerable through the social health insurance. And then it's also very unclear why primary health care is heavily domiciled, at the national government. This is a default function, primary health care, but it's heavily domiciled at the national level. Then a breakdown of the health sector budget, reveals that there is a decline in donor funding. We have critical programs like family planning, like TB, HIV. They are experiencing a decrease in donor funding. But do we see government, making an effort to cover that gap that is being created by the withdrawal of donor funding? This shadow budget is looking at specific areas where we can target and free up resources that could be reallocated to safeguard key priorities. For example, in the health sector, how can we free up resources? This can be done by getting rid of redundancy that was created by creating the two state departments without a clear mandate or clear functions for each state department. For example, curative and reproductive, maternal, neonatal, and adolescent health is duplicated, in those two state departments. So that's an area that can be targeted to free up some resources instead of creating redundancies. And we raise critical questions. These are some of the questions we have raised for the health sector. For example, how will the government ensure long-term sustainability of critical programs as we transition from donor financing? It's very unclear how that will happen. And how does the government plan to continue financing the competing goals of expanding social health insurance coverage and remunerating CHPs, the community health promoters, within a shrinking fiscal space? For the education sector, again, there is a huge issue when it comes to analysis of the budget policy statement and the sector report, the education sector working report. For example, when we analyze budget execution and how the sector is performing in terms of KPIs, you can see some programs absorbing a budget of 85%, but you only achieve 57% of the set KPIs. What does that really tell us? Do we really have efficiency when it comes to budget execution? Why should you absorb 85% or 81%, but only deliver or achieve 50%? Then when we analyze what the information contained in the sector report and the BPS, there is a discrepancy. For example, the number of TVET tutors to be employed as per the sector working report is 2,000, but the BPS gives 3,000. So that disconnect clearly shows that the two documents will not be aligned when it comes to allocation of resources. So, and how is this going to be achieved when the education sector is experiencing a budget cut of 15%? It's not clear. But still within the education sector, there is a space to free up resources. And this is how. And this is also a recommendation that was given by the task force, that the governance and standards program, that is at the TSC, it should be merged with quality and standards assurance to remove that duplication, because it comes at a cost. So those two programs need to be merged, and therefore there is a need to fast track that. For the education sector, it's not clear why teaching and learning of digital skills from primary to tertiary education is a priority in the 2024 BPS, but when you look at the education sector report, the sector working report, there is no KPI for that program. So how can we hold the government to account if there is no delivery of learning of digital skills? Because the government can defend the position by saying maybe we didn't set any KPI. But why should we not have KPIs, but there is a budget allocation for that? The other one is why TFET program is receiving a budget cut despite this program being highlighted as a priority in the 2024 BPS. Let's now turn to payer. This sector has pending bills increased by 4 times. In 2020-2021, the sector had 6.3 billion of pending bills. As of 2022-2023, that had increased to 25 billion. Within 2 years, you have pending bills increased by 4 times. Okay? And when we break now this down, the increase in the pending bills for this sector, half of the pending bills are from the executive office of the president. That's allowed 13 billion. Out of the 25 billion, 13 billion are from one office. Now, the critical question for this sector is, why does the sector have pending bills without provisions? Because from the analysis, we have so many pending bills without provisions. So if a pending bill does not have a provision, definitely government is not committed to clearing such a pending bill. Agriculture, rural and urban development. For this sector, there is an overall improvement in KPIs performance. For instance, State Department for Blue Economy and Fisheries increased from 40 to 60%. But still for this sector, there is a room to free up resources by addressing overlap of functions between National Arts Commission and State Department for Arts. We have so many overlaps in those two programs. That is the National Arts Commission and the State Department for Arts. Let's do away with those overlaps to free up resources. Then for the agriculture sector, we have water and irrigation. Then when you go to energy infrastructure and not energy, the environment sector, we also have another program for water and irrigation. So many duplications. When you go to environment sector, we have land rehabilitation and management. Agriculture sector, again, we have land management and information system. So those duplications can be targeted to free up resources. The critical questions we are raising for the agriculture sector, for example, is how will the government transform agriculture, achieve food security, and value addition when the sector is set to receive a budget cut of 10%. Then the other issue is how sustainable is the fertilizer subsidy given a budget cut to the relevant MDA and previous challenges related to subsidy programs. We have had issues with subsidy programs. How sustainable is this? Environment, water, and natural resources. Now here, there is an issue. For example, if we pick the Garana Kuraru project, now it has been running for the last 9 years. But when you look at the sector report, we only have a target for the size of land to be irrigated. But there is no target for the number of bags we want to produce. Why should we have only the size of land to be irrigated what's so important is the output. Not, we can irrigate 5,000 acres, but we harvest 100 bags. So without a target for the number of bags or the produce, then giving only a target for the size of land you want to irrigate, might not give us a clear reflection to inform our decision whether we should continue investing in such a project or not. Is it viable? Is it serving us as Kenyans? So far, the Garana Kuraru has consumed 7.9 billion against the initial cost of 8.8 billion. But we are not still clear whether we are benefiting from this program or not. Energy infrastructure and ICT, it has a budget of 505 billion. That is about 20% of the total MDA's allocation, 505 billion. It's a huge budget. But we know, how large infrastructure projects have been contributing to a sharp increase in borrowing. So if it's a sector with such a huge risk, then there is a need for increased oversight to achieve desired economic turnaround. Because currently we are struggling to service debt because we have been previously borrowing to finance large infrastructure projects. Are we reaping the benefit? In financial year 24-25, we noted a few programs that are gaining massively. For example, coastline infrastructure and pedestrian access. It has an increase of 210%. I don't know what that means, coastline infrastructure and pedestrian access, but it has a huge budget increase. Urban and metropolitan development, a budget increase of 90%. Again, we would really like to see a budget for the people being implemented with such a huge increase of 90%. We should not be having bus terminals that are not being used. Markets have been constructed but abandoned. This kind of budget for metropolitan should transform our urban areas to be more economically viable. With such a budget, we should see informal sectors being developed using this kind of a budget increase of 90%. E-government services has an increase of 242%, but the Auditor General raised some queries around e-government services. So as the government implements this budget, it's also good to address the issues that were raised by the Auditor General. And now at this point, I would like to invite my colleague, Veronica Degwa, who will take us through fiscal decentralization, and then she will invite our next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bernard, for taking us through the first part of the presentation. I'll be going through the next part of it, which is fiscal decentralization. Our distinguished guests, our partners, members of the Fourth Estate, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's an honor to be presenting today on fiscal decentralization. And before I do, I usually look at the success of devolution by looking at my village back in Nakuru County. So I still use the same very not good road to my village. Our village still doesn't have access to piped water. Our dispensary may have been upgraded in terms of the infrastructure, but medical supplies still remain scanty, among other issues. So for me, the success of devolution depends on whom you ask, because there are some who say devolution has worked magic in their villages or in their respective counties. So, but with that, let's look at the story that the numbers we reviewed will tell about the success or the lack of it among counties. So the first part of it is on revenue, and counties, as we know, majorly rely on equitable share, with an average of 73% of revenues coming from the equitable share, and their own source revenue accounting for only 8% of their total revenue basket. Now, beyond the 8% number, the interrogation we are looking at is how well counties are performing against their potential of OSR as estimated by the Commission on Revenue Allocation, and how well the counties have performed against their own targets. The numbers reveals that while the counties collected around 38 billion in the financial year 2022-2023, the estimated potential is around 216 billion. This means, at least according to the estimation by CRA, that counties are only at 18% of their potential. So beyond the potential by the Commission on Revenue Allocation, there's also the county own targets on revenue. The challenge is most of the counties have failed to meet their own revenue targets, with some counties collecting as low as 12% of their revenue targets, and these targets, they are not taken to them, they set them by themselves. So the question that we were asking is, what are the implications of these numbers in terms of budget execution? One, the reliance on the equitable share means any shock at the national level will affect service delivery at the counties. Secondly, the underperformance in own source revenue has been one of the main contributing factors to the challenge of pending bills at the county. And as Bernard presented, most of these pending bills come from development expenditures. So at the end of the year, counties compromise on their development spending, partly due to underperformance in own source revenue. Now, for the coming financial year, the national government has marginally increased the equitable share to counties by around 6 billion. There are conditional grants to the counties of around 54 billion. This brings total allocation to counties to 445 billion. Now, with such marginal increases from the equitable share, counties can only work on growing their own source revenue to support their budget execution. So then we further interrogated the numbers. First, how well counties have performed around their targets. The three counties I've listed there, Lamu, Kirinyaga, and Kitui, are the three counties that surpassed their revenue targets in the previous financial year, but their targets against the actual performance reveal a deeper story. For Lamu, it increased its revenue target by only 3 million. That means if you factor in inflation and other factors, it would mean it actually lowered its revenue target or revenue collection from the previous year, meaning that that target either way, without making any changes, would be surpassed. For Kirinyaga County, the target was very close to the actual collection in the previous year, while for Kitui County, which also surpassed its target, it halved its revenue target. So this performance, while it has been lauded by the Control of Budget in some of their reports, it is important to interrogate these numbers further, and especially because they are below their estimated potential. But there's still some hope from some counties, and counties can benchmark from their peers. For Homa Bay, it has been able to grow its revenues, and mostly from the hospital fees and charges, and therefore counties can draw some lessons from such a county. Then another key concern is that we have national government agencies which key mandate is to support counties and build their capacity in revenue collection. One of it, there's a department fully dedicated to the counties at the National Treasury, the Intergovernmental and Fiscal Relations Department. but counties continues to struggle with their revenue collection and administration. We have CRA, which apart from sharing the equitable share, is supposed to enhance, to support counties in enhancing their own source revenues. And so we are calling upon these institutions to step up in their mandates and to support counties. An addition here could be the Senate, whose part of the mandate is supporting counties, and there are various bills that have been put to the Senate, but still remain pending, and we'd wish those ones to be expedited for them to be able to support counties in generating more own source revenues. So based on these gaps we have flagged, we make some recommendations. And one of the key challenge among counties is that they do not have elaborate or good revenue management systems. And these relate both to administration aspects and enforcement. So the national government, and within its mandate, should support these counties in coming up with good revenue management systems that are harmonized across counties to enhance OSR generation. Then the second one is for the counties to automate their revenue functions. Counties have embraced technology and automation in their revenue functions, but they are at different stages of automation. Now, automation shouldn't be taken as a magic bullet, because there are some counties that have automated but failed to grow their revenues. So this must be paired with administrative reforms. Key national government institutions, the National Treasury, Senate, and the National Assembly, to expedite enactment of key policies and bills. Part of this is the tariffs and pricing policy that was proposed back in 2019 in a document generated by the National Treasury. We have the Valuation for Rating Act and the Rating Act. This is especially to guide valuation of properties and to allow counties to adopt modern approaches to levying of land rates. And we know this is one of the key revenue sources for most of the counties, especially the urban counties such as Nairobi, Kiambu, Mombasa, and Kisumu. Then for counties, they have mainly relied on their finance bills to institute changes in their levies, fees, and charges. But here we are proposing for the counties to have more elaborate policy and legal frameworks. Case of Nairobi is a good example. They have a revenue act for most of their main revenue streams. So this is something that other counties can learn. Then for the CRA and the National Treasury, to work together with counties to build their revenue administrative capacity. We have seen some counties work with KRA as well, and these can go a long way in increasing county own source revenue. So with this overview of revenue, we go to what counties, how counties have been executing their budgets. So a look at expenditure performance among counties show a slight increase in the absorption rates, but the key concern remains that development expenditures in terms of absorption rates still lag behind recurrent. And as I mentioned, this is partly because when OSR performs, the casualty is mostly development spending. So beyond the aggregate numbers, counties are still not meeting the 70-30 threshold ratio for the recurrent to development expenditures. Now, when the counties submit their budgets at the beginning of the year, that ratio is usually met, and that is the only way they get approvals from the controller of budget. Now, when it comes to budget execution, that ratio is hardly met, and this also means that more than 35% of county revenues are going to recurrent expenditures. Now, on the next slide, we have county spending by functions. Most of the counties' resources are going to the general public services, and this is mostly recurrent in nature. And then we have the health sector accounting for around 24%, but for some counties, the health expenditures are above 30%. So that table reveals that in terms of budget execution, counties have focused resources on mostly the more devolved functions will get a bigger share compared to the less devolved functions. So that's why we see, for example, on social protection, the spending is below 1%. Then there have been some changes in terms of legislations, and one of which I would want to highlight is the Facility Improvement Fund Act that was enacted in last year. So this means that the county, in terms of public facilities at the counties, they'll be allowed to spend the revenues they collect at source. A departure from the past is that the Facility Improvement Fund comprised only of user fees and charges levied at the government, but in line with the new act, this will also include reimbursements for services received from the Social Health Insurance Fund, the Equitable Share, conditional grants, and donations. So in terms of this legislation, there will be complementarity between these different sources of funding. But there are implications on budget execution for counties, especially because the hospital fees and charges constituted a large component of county revenues. So one key concern that comes up is the second component of the source of funding for the FIF, and the government, the national government under NHIF, does not have a good history of processing reimbursements on time. Previously, we had a memorandum between NHIF and the facilities of a maximum of 30 days in terms of processing reimbursements. But the Auditor General flagged some of delays, with some going up to more than 1,000 days up from the agreed 30 days. So the question is, will this kind of past history impact services at the health facilities, and what will be the implication in terms of access to health services? Then counties have in the past used their OSR to smooth their cash flows, especially whenever there are delays in terms of equitable share transfer from the national government. Now that the hospitals will be retaining these monies within at source, there is an important dialogue or discussion among counties and the hospitals to look at how this new law will impact counties' cash flows and their budget flows. And then as another point is that some counties funded a majority of their health services, up to around some as high as 60% from FIF. And so in terms of allocating complementary resources, it will be important to look at how counties will be able to manage this going forward. So in terms of our recommendations, we emphasize on the need for counties to ring-fence resources for development expenditures. In terms of sealing leakages in recurrent spending, counties to fully shift to the payments through the integrated personnel and payroll database systems. Again, the controller of budget has continually flagged use of manual payrolls as a source of misappropriation for the counties. Then, for the counties to ensure the reforms in the health sector are effective, there is also need for the national governments to ensure that facilities receive the reimbursements in time to allow for their smooth operations. A second emerging issue that we'd like to look at is the transfer of functions. Today, there are discussions among different national government agencies over and devolved functions that rightfully belong to counties and are yet to be devolved. This majorly relates to functions that are shared between the national government, and more than 10 years since devolution, they are still performed by the national government. So the president, upon election, declared that he'll ensure full devolution of functions to the counties, and as such, a multi-agency technical task team led by IGRTC, the Intergovernmental and Fiscal Relations Council. The agency was supposed to look at functions that were already unbundled by the transition authority and rightfully belong to the county so that they can pave way for their devolution. Now, the task force has made some presentation to Parliament, and they have costed some functions within various sectors, including agriculture, transport, education, tourism, wildlife, and water. And their total cost has been estimated as 272 billion. While this is the cost, we may not expect the entire 272 billion to go to the counties, but we know, especially under the water function, some of these funds should rightfully go to the counties. We also have an old report that was done soon after devolution, the Presidential Task Force on Parastatal Reforms, that identified 18 state corporations, and most of which are waterworks agencies, still performing county functions. Now, according to the Water Act, the major infrastructure and water is supposed to be handled by the national government. But in terms of last mile connectivity, or what the water service providers do, that belong to the counties. But we have seen some instances of these national government agencies going to the extent of being last mile providers of water. So in this case, we are recommending this report to be released, and there was a commitment it would come soon, a few days after the last year's devolution conference, but the report is yet to be released, and as such, devolution of some of these functions is still pending. So with my presentation and what Bernard presented on, we have some key messages from the shadow budget, and some of these are on some of the reform areas, and where we would like national government, the National Assembly to focus on. Of course, the first one is spending bills. And most of these spending bills are owed to the private sector, and as such, there is a liquidity constraint to the sector. So we are calling upon the government to expedite settlement of these spending bills. But we are not blind to fiscal consolidation, and so we know they cannot be cleared at once, but a phased clearance of these spending bills would be ideal. And then in terms of sectoral functions, so the functions between different sectors and programs, and also between the national government and the county governments, there are clear cases of overlaps in terms county governments or different state department implementing the same programs. We have duplication, as was evident in the health sectors, and redundancies that are evident in some of the MDAs. And as such, this has led to wasteful spending, and harmonization of government functions will go a long way in ring-fencing some resources. Then our analysis also revealed significant discrepancies between sector reports and budget allocations. This is between the sector working group reports at the sector level and the budget policy statement as compiled by the National Treasury. So this reveals a weak linkage between planning and budgeting, and so this is an area that needs further strengthening. And then lastly, for the national government and the county governments, there are low absorption rates for development spending. and an average of 40% of development budgets remaining unabsorbed, while we have seen the recurrent absorption rates are above 90%. So there is also the need for the government to pay attention to development spending. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Thank you so much, Bernard. Thank you so much, Ruth, for leading this team. And before I get to the next session, I forgot to ask, and I request that I ask now. We are sharing on social media, and we're going to be sharing your photos. I'm requesting for consent. You know, we have the digital role. We will be sharing with you a form that you'll be filling in for consent purposes. But for now, I can see so many nodes, so it's a goal that we share your photos on our social media platforms. Everybody of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Thank you. That is endorsed. No contrary. Thank you so much. So the next session, it's going to be a session. We have had key messages, we have had findings, we have had recommendations. So we're getting to a session where we want to expound this further. And to be able to get into that session, it is my privilege to introduce a distinguished panel that is going to help us expound further on what we have listened to and what we have heard. And to help me, I will request that you help me welcome this distinguished panel, and I'll begin with inviting Ruth Kendagor. Ruth Kendagor, as I had mentioned, she's the head of research and capacity strengthening at IPF, and she's going to be moderating this session and the panel discussion. As she comes on stage, kindly help me by clapping. Joining Ruth as a panelist, our esteemed guest, as I had mentioned, from the Parliamentary Budget Office, we are joined by CPA Joash Kosiba. CPA Joash Kosiba has a deep understanding on budgetary processes and legislative frameworks, bringing invaluable perspectives to our discussion. The next person to join this meeting, the panel discussion, is John Wengi. John Wengi is a senior Thank you. John Wengi is a senior research analyst and also spearheads IPF's work in the regional space in Ethiopia. Last but not least, I welcome Cuba. Please forgive me if I butcher your name. Cuba Ngondi. Thank you. Cuba Ngondi is a program support and research and communications from the International Budget Partnerships, IBP. Thank you. So without further ado, let us extend our gratitude to the panel discussion and the panelists led by Ruth. Let's listen in keenly and let's get to learn. Karibu, Ruth.
Asante. Asante sana, Rosalia. Very much welcome to our panelists today. Would like to take a deeper reflection into the discussions that we have had from our senior research analyst. And to start us off, I would like to pose a general question to our panelists, but this also is a reflection point for each and every one of us in this room today, including those who are joining us virtually. We have heard of the analytics and the key issues raised from the annual National Shadow Budget, the fourth edition by IPF. In your opinion, how would this information, how is this report helpful, and how can it be helpful for your work in your respective institution, especially as key actors within Kenya's public finance management landscape?
Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. Let me once again recognize the presence of Honorable Madam Mary Amase, who is the Vice Chairperson of Budget and Appropriation Committee. I come from Parliamentary Budget Office, and my office, established by the Public Finance Management Act, Section 9 and 10, is serving basically a committee and the rest of the committees in both the National Assembly and on the Senate. So, Madam, I recognize your presence as the chief guest for this particular function. On the question in terms of the helpfulness of the information that you have received this morning, the information is coming at such a critical time in terms of the budget timeline, and as a parliamentary budget office, I believe this information is not just helpful to us, but also helpful to our main clients who are members of parliament. As you are aware, we are in the second stage of the budget cycle, basically the approval stage. Budget has 3 stages. The formulation stage has just ended with the approval of the budget policy statement. So this information is very key in terms of informing not just the opinion of us as technical experts who advises these committees, but also informing the members of parliament in their deliberation. Probably, I think next time we need to also engage the committees, of course, especially Budget and Appropriation Committee, now also Public Debt and Privatization Committee. But more importantly, you also need probably, as we have country coordinator, you also need to have county coordinator, so that counties are also represented in this room to take back the message in the last chapter on fiscal decentralization. I believe the information is coming at a critical time. The estimates are coming at the end of this month, and Parliament has got basically 2 months to look at it to ensure that it is passed. We have an appropriation act in place, and of course the finance bill. So I believe it's going to be very, very helpful, not just to me as an individual, but also to my clients who are members of parliament in both the National Assembly and the Senate.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Today, as we launch the 2024-2025 shadow budget, so we're asking how this might be useful in the work that I do. The work that I do at IPF, I lead the healthcare financing, and we're having this at a time when this is the topical issue about healthcare and service delivery. The doctors on the strike. One of the main contentions is about the budget. It's about having not provided adequate resources in the budget to pay, for example, for the medical interns, for the promotions, absorption of doctors. So this will be very useful, coming at a time when now the stage for preparation of the budget is coming to an end, and we're transitioning into the approval stage where the parliament will be playing a critical role in approving the budget for the next financial year, that is 24-25. And we would like to ensure that the priorities are properly incorporated into the budget, because when it is not budgeted for, it will be very difficult to be done. Even now, the question is, where do we get the money to pay the doctors? Because the money is not there in the budget. So if we had it in the budget, it will be easy to address this. So the headache is, how do we get into the budget? So now we'll be looking at ensuring that what do we call the priorities in the health sector? We make sure that every key player and participant in the space ensures that the priorities are properly incorporated into the budget, so that now when we transition after approval into the implementation, we can be very sure that whatever has been approved into the budget will be implemented, because it is already in the budget. If not put into the budget, it's very hard for it to be implemented. So we will be looking at every stakeholder to ensure that use the shadow budget to engage parliament, using evidence, using the numbers. Say numbers don't lie, so we have the numbers. We have gone a little bit further, ensuring that we engage with the members of parliament in the approval stage using the evidence contained in the shadow budget.
Good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Cuba Houghton from the International Budget Partnership, Kenya. And I feel like I'm very overwhelmed with positivity just as a result of the shadow budget, because despite a lot of the challenges that have been highlighted, despite a lot of the issues that have been highlighted, it's very encouraging to see that there are alternatives, right? The actual recommendations that we can actually put towards getting our budgets to be more responsive to citizens. And I think one takeaway from me from the presentation was there's this question that as IBP we've always been asked, particularly this year when engaging with county and national governments, which is, okay, you've come and you've given us your views, you've done your analysis, you've looked at the numbers, but what would you do if you were in my position? Right? We've been asked this by the Senate, we've been asked this by the National Assembly, county governments as well. And I think one of the really powerful aspects or one of the really powerful things about the shadow budget is it is that alternative, right? It is a document that actually provides us with, not only us as civil society, but citizens with actual alternatives to what is being proposed by national and county governments towards getting a more inclusive public finance space. So that's the main takeaway from me.
Great. Thank you, panelists, for those amazing responses. And I hope we're picking out areas and also reflecting and asking ourselves, once we finish this session, once we walk out of this room today, what can we do about the shadow budget? How can we move it steps further to ensure that we all contribute towards navigating the public finance landscape? And so moving forward to the next questions, a specific question to Josh, our panelist from the Parliamentary Budget Office, specifically reflecting on the overlap between the national and the county governments, especially reflecting on what our colleague Veronica has presented on the transfer of functions, highlighting that functions that are still held at the national level accumulate to about approximately 272 billion, which is a significant amount of money that would be useful and impactful for counties in terms of functions. And so in your opinion, what steps can be taken to streamline these functions and to ensure better alignment between national and county mandates? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I really appreciate the question and also that particular section of the report. From our analysis as Parliamentary Budget Office, 5 major sectors are still having overlap in national government, starting from agriculture, health, transport and public works, issues of trade and markets, and issues of physical planning and even economic planning. But I don't want to dwell into that. The duplication is not just happening at the national level. For information, counties spend approximately 18 billion every year, with an average of 400 million every year on bursaries. And bursaries is a national government function. So where are they spending the bursaries? They're not spending the bursaries on ECD, which is a county function. They're spending the bursaries on high schools. They're spending the bursaries on universities. They're spending the bursaries on TVETs. And why do you think they're spending that? They know that is a duplication, and why do you think it's because of the... So let's look at the duplication from the other side. There's also the popular one, dishing a county from Nairobi to free milk in Mombasa. So those are the questions we have put to the Senate, that even before the county governments ask for more money, they need to know that every year they are returning back 18 billion to national government. Now, in terms of addressing the duplications, there's the issue of alignment of policies and the legal framework. A lot of laws, we have done a summary of all the 5 sectors, the laws that needs to be looked at to ensure that those functions that are being done by national government goes to counties. Of course, from CARA, of course, under roads, to agriculture, where the governor is doing subsidized fertilizer and the national government is doing the same. So that alignment needs to take effect, because some of those laws have never been amended 10 years down the line. The other issue is the issue of course, the clawback. There's the issue of duplication, but also the issue of clawback. We have seen some functions going to national county governments, but they're coming back. You have talked about the voluntary, is it the health volunteers? They're called the health promoters. So that's a serious clawback that we need to talk about, even as we're trying to give back more, because there's a function which had gone to counties. Counties have recruited their health promoters, but now we are seeing national government doing a serious clawback on those particular sanctions. I'm glad Parliamentary Budget Office is represented in the intergovernmental technical relations team as part of the team. My immediate boss is representing us there, and we have looked at those numbers in terms of costing of those particular functions of 272 billion. And from every year, we usually look at those particular areas and tell the National Assembly and at the Senate that when we look at health, for example, the budget for this financial year alone, 2023-2024, up to between 16 billion to 30 billion can comfortably go back to counties because the domicile at national government doing duplicated functions. So basically they look into laws and policies, the issues of political goodwill, because even governors are duplicating national government functions, and the like, of course. So those are some of the areas to address those overlaps and duplications.
Indeed, a very interesting perspective that we look at it from both sides of the coin. Functions that should be at the county levels, still held by the national government, but also functions that the county governments are performing that should be held at the national level, and what it means for resource allocation. And we hope with the strengthening of the legal frameworks, these issues will be harmonized. Moving forward to our colleague, John Nyangi, who leads our health financing work in Kenya and Ethiopia. John, would like you to take a reflection into the reforms in healthcare in Kenya, particularly looking at the new legislations that speak about health financing, the Social Health Insurance Fund, the FIF Fund, the Digital Health Act, the focus on the primary healthcare. And also with the observation our colleague Bernard Jury has mentioned that PHC, as is currently being implemented, is still primarily domiciled at the national level, whereas this is more of a county function. If you could take a reflection into what are the challenges that we expect and that actors already need to put their claws into to ensure that as we start the roll-off of the new legislations and the new financing mechanisms, we are able to ring-fence these financing mechanisms, these legislations to ensure their effectiveness and protect the financing mechanisms, particularly from the challenges that were experienced in the previous systems, including NHIF. What actions can be taken, and how prepared are county governments in terms of adopting these regulations? What needs to be done? Over to you, John.
Thank you for that question, Ruth. It's true that we have seen a serious commitment from the current government in terms of creating a conducive environment for delivery of universal health coverage. We have seen in the record of shortest time possible of the 4 legislations. I had one comment that had such work being completed within the shortest time that we have seen the Social Insurance Act, Digital Health Act, Private Healthcare Act being completed. And all that were meant to improve the environment for implementation of UHC, which failed in the previous regime that attempted and piloted in the 4 counties, but it failed. So here is a recommitment that we're giving it another stab, but this time round, from the bottom up, from primary health care. They say the previous one failed because the concentration was at the tertiary level, curative, where cancer was given money and resources to purchase medicines and be in the hospital, wait for people to fall sick and come to the hospital. But this time is saying we want to prevent people from coming to the hospital. We want to go to where they are. And picking it from where my colleague George mentioned about the clawback of primary health care back to the national government, we are now seeing that out of over 100,000 community health promoters, the compensation for the stipends is shared 50-50 between the national government and the county governments. So does this mean the national government taking a sizable control over primary health care that is majorly delivered in level 2, level 3, and level 1, which is community level? So what does that mean? So that's a big challenge that we are going to be seeing how the national government is going to deal with this issue of 50-50 compensation of primary health, community primary health promoters. We see also a challenge in transition from the National Health Insurance Fund to the social health insurance. We have seen health facilities claiming that they have not been paid their money from NHIF, and NHIF is going away. So how do we see a smooth transition and we don't bring the problems with NHIF to SHIF? Another challenge that we are looking at is on FIF, where we're going to have all monies raised at the health facilities, retained at the health facilities for improvement of service delivery at health facilities. And from what we have seen from this shadow budget, when Veronica was presenting, FIF constitutes a sizable revenue within the counties. So, and those revenues now will be retained at the facilities, not going to the county revenue fund, where the executive will have to channel them back to the health facilities. Are we going to see the willingness of the county treasuries to let these funds remain at the health facilities, and also not seeing it as a substitute by cutting the money that is being allocated to the health sector, because now the funds retained, generated at the health facilities are going to be retained there. So those are a number of the challenges that we are going to be monitoring and seeing that the new reforms that are meant to improve and accelerate the achievement of UHC are addressed. And finally, we need proper PFM capacity strengthening for the health facilities, particularly when it comes to FIF implementation, so that we ensure there is proper capacity building for those medical officers, for those facility in charges, for those medical superintendents, that the money they are going to retain, for some other counties, is up to 30% of their revenue that is going to remain at these facilities. That's a lot of money, significant in relation to their own source revenue that they generate. So we need that those funds are properly managed so that we don't have several mistakes and gaps coming out and ending up with the audit queries, ASCC, and other mismanagement, wastage of resources from an initiative that was supposed to improve resources. And also now, another thing is the challenge on collecting 2.75 for insurance from the informal sector. We know from the wage earners, from the salaries, you and me who earn a salary, it's very easy. My employer will deduct 2.75% of my gross income and submit. But when it comes informal sector, who are supposed to contribute, me earn a monthly salary, I contribute monthly. The informal person will contribute annually.
Once for the using the means testing instrument, which has been a challenge. We like to see where has it been completed and actually giving a true reflection of the income of those guys in the informal sector that will be subjected to the 2.75% contribution to the social health insurance fund when it comes for implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for the reflection in terms of implementation of the health financing legislations and the reforms. Indeed, as you can see, John is very passionate about healthcare financing. Over to our colleague and friend
from the International Budget Partnership, and particularly reflecting at what fiscal consolidation means both at the national and the county level. Particularly, we look at the equitable share of revenue to the county governments as proposed for the financial year 2024-2025. We see that there's a marginal increase from 385 billion to 391 billion in the coming financial year 2024-2025. However, if you look at this allocation, the change in terms of a share of the total government budget, there's a 9%, close to 10% decline between 2023-24 and 2024-25. We do appreciate, and we have seen the effort that government has made towards achieving fiscal consolidation. But the question we want to reflect and ask ourselves is, how can we ensure a fair balance between the national government and between the National Fiscal Consolidation Plan, and at the same time empowering counties to be able to undertake development agenda and to meet the needs of citizens?
Thank you for your question. I think there's many aspects to or components of what you've asked. But let me start with the issue of the equitable share. So one of the things that we've noticed as the International Budget Partnership, as we've engaged in the division of revenue and the revenue sharing process over the past 10 years, is that until the issue of full devolution of functions and clarity of functions between national and county governments is resolved, the division of revenue process will remain largely arbitrary, right? If there is not clarity on the responsibilities and roles of county governments in terms of service delivery in specific sectors like health, specific sectors like water, then the block figure, the 391 you're talking about, is not scientific to that extent at its fundamental basis. And so we believe that as long as that report from IGTRC doesn't come out and we do not see a full kind of devolution or conversation around who has what functions, then that conversation will remain largely unresolved. And so the number for like 391 will not be too reflective of the actual service delivery needs of counties. The other aspect of that is that 391, or commonly the division of revenue process, is based on the costing of functions done at the onset of devolution, right? And we're talking about 10 to 12 years in the past. And so the question is, if you consider the service delivery needs of counties now, counties today, how accurate is that process in terms of giving counties the equitable share, the share of national revenue that they need? And the second one that we saw actually in this, that we noticed in this division of revenue bill of this year, was the fact that if you look at the share of nationally collected revenue that goes towards national government and that has gone towards county governments over the past 5 to 6 years, you'll notice a trend of re-centralization, which is that in I think 2020 or 2019, the share of national revenue that went to counties was about 17%. But if you go to the current financial year, what's being proposed, that number has dropped to 13%. And it's the opposite for national government. It's jumped to about 84% over the same period. And it's worrying because even if you look at where the increase in national government is coming from, it's mostly on public debt repayments, right? And the reason this is an issue is because there is a relatively finite amount of national revenue that is collected each year. And there are many things that compete for that national revenue. And counties are just among one of them, right? So we have the counties, we have national government expenditure by MDAs, then we have debt servicing repayments. And we've seen that there's been a prioritization of debt service repayment because debt servicing or debt repayments is a first charge on the consolidated revenue fund, according to law. And so it's a bit of a fundamental issue in terms of how we arrive at the number of 391 billion and how counties actually, or how responsive that division of revenue process is to the needs of counties. But to the question of fiscal consolidation, I think it's good to see that in the budget policy statement of this year, the national government is making efforts to actually achieve fiscal consolidation, right? So we see a decline in the deficit by about 1% in absolute terms or 2% in absolute terms, including grants. And when you compare it to GDP, the decrease is about 1 or 2%. So generally, it's a positive sign, right? An indication that there has been, unsustainable expenditure, or we've been spending outside of our means. And I think this has been declared a number of times just in this recent year. But there's two caveats to this fiscal consolidation conversation. One is an appreciation of where we've come from and how we ended up here, right? And it's important to note that the reason we are embarking on fiscal consolidation, apart from through the persuasion of international financial institutions like the IMF, is that there are a lot of public debt decisions and conversations that we've been having since 2010, 2014, up until today, so the past 10 years, that have led us to have an unsustainable public debt crisis now, right? And you can take the example of, all that's happened in the aftermath of the Eurobond 1 of 2014, and the fact that it seems like a lot of things have had to give away in order for us to pay back that Eurobond this financial year. And so the question becomes, what decisions are we making differently in terms of public debt management that won't allow us to, or that we won't find ourselves in the same situation in 10 years to come, right? And so that's a conversation that needs to be had. So what different decisions are we making? And the second is the issue of state corporations as a source of a lot of the fiscal risks to the national government. And also in the conversation of the devolution of functions, you find that in the water sector, as was mentioned during the presentation, we have a lot of waterworks development agencies doing work that counties were eventually supposed to do if you look at the Water Act. And the budget policy statement of 2023 anticipates that the fiscal risk from state corporations alone is about 2.75 trillion, right? If you look at the bulk of national pending bills are held by state corporations, right? And so in this conversation around fiscal consolidation, it also touches on the wage bill discussion that's going on this week, that, Kenya really has to grapple with the problem that we have around state corporations and the amount of our budget that actually goes through state corporations, and kind of looking at it as a way to actually achieve this fiscal consolidation. Of course, there's a conversation that's been going on around privatization of some of the state entities, but I think it's also needs to be beyond that, right? So as opposed to just selling off these state assets, to actually improving the way that they work, and there's been a number of reforms around that. So I think that's one of the ways that we can perhaps think about the fiscal consolidation conversation, but also maintain our support to counties in terms of being more accurate in the ways that counties can actually contribute to development and get their share of the nationally collected revenue. And allow me to say something, a last point on that. When you look at this challenge of how much of the national collected revenue should go towards county governments, and versus how much county governments are able to collect in own source revenue. The question that we've been thinking about for a while is the framework for devolution in terms of collection of revenue, in terms of the division of revenue process, actually designed in a way that is meant to make counties succeed, right? Are counties actually being given the actual revenue sources or the tax collection sources that would actually see them succeed, right, and be able to finance their budget sustainably? Because one could argue that the ultimate goal of devolution is to have a relatively top level and kind of policy-oriented national government, while service delivery is implemented by county governments. So is there a way that we can reframe this conversation in terms of perhaps granting more power to county governments to be able to finance their own budgets on specific, perhaps, tax heads? There's a very controversial conversation in the literature around subnational units or county governments or local provinces being able to collect personal income tax, which is a conversation that I don't think we've been having. But conversations like that around expanding perhaps what counties can collect so that they don't necessarily remain kind of attached to national government in that respect.
Indeed, very interesting conversation. I like how Cuba had to put a sigh in between the discussion to really show that the issue of resource allocation and resource sharing between the levels of government is indeed a thorny issue that is with us. And every time we speak about budgets, we cannot look at budgets without rethinking and re-strategizing how best we can optimize resource sharing. And so in the interest of time, the final questions, I would request that we take a maximum of 2 minutes each to just quickly respond so that we can move to the next step. Back to Josh from the Parliamentary Budget Office, specifically reflecting on the issue of pending bills. This is an issue that has been persistent in our budgetary framework every year. And our colleagues have mentioned that we have close to 570 million accumulating in pending bills that needs to be sorted. And also looking at the recommendation that the pending bills should be a first charge, or rather should be prioritized in allocations for the next budget. But at the same time, we are trying to reduce expenditures and rework on resources, ensuring we have monies for financing looking forward, forward-looking activities. How best or what solutions would we be able to put forth to address the issue of recommending to address the issue of pending bills. How can transparency and accountability be strengthened in government spending to ensure there is value for money and enhance service delivery?
Thank you very much for the question. The issue of pending bill has been with us for the last 10 years plus. If you look at the publications, the Parliamentary Budget Office, as early as 2012, 2013, 14, 15, the issue has been with us. And I think we have talked about 570 billion for national government and around 165 billion for county government. I just want to bring to the attention of the audience that these two figures does not include a very important component called pension arrears. So for counties, for example, when we talk about 165, also remember an equivalent amount of 165 billion has never been remitted to the 3 pension funds by counties. And the same applies to national government. From our universities, we are not remitting pension fund. Of course, it's not captured as part of the pending bill because, of course, of our current accounting system. We are in cash. And I'm very, very glad. I'm one of the people who was very, very glad when the cabinet approved the shift to IPSAS accrual, because one of the recommendations, if you look at the Public Accounts Committee report where I served for quite a while, was for the government to move to the IPSAS accrual, which now has been approved by the cabinet. So what does IPSAS accrual do? It doesn't really clear the bills, but it brings the bills into the full view. Under our current reporting system, pending bill is not reported in the financial statements, and therefore, when you go to Auditor General, they'll tell you a different figure, Control Budget will tell you a different figure, Treasury will tell you a different figure, PBO will tell you a different figure. So under accrual, then this will now become come to the main books rather than being below the line. The other one, of course, so basically the movement to IPSAS accrual will be able to address that. The other issue is that we need to look at, and we need to be very sincere as a country, the issue of budget credibility. How credible is our budgeting system in Kenya for both national and county government? You need to ask yourself, we pass a budget in June and the implementation starts in July. By September, we are talking about supplementary one. So the question then would be, what were we doing 2 months ago? Was it credible? But just to bring the issue of credibility into perspective, for the county governments, even if, as of today, is it the 16th of April, national government, the donors were to give them the monies that they are supposed to get under equitable share and conditional grants, I'm telling you they cannot clear the 165 pending bill for counties. What is the reason? Over time, counties have been playing around with their budget in terms of OSR. So we have done a trend analysis. The amount of pending bill of 165, if you look at the OSR, the money that counties are supposed to collect, compare the actual and their target, the difference is 165. So basically it means the contributor, especially to county government on pending bill, is not the national government not submitting taking money. It is the issue of they played around with their credibility of their budget, and therefore they budgeted with the money they were not able to collect. So that's the fact. And this is a fact that we have told the senators, we have told the governors. I was with Governor Nyong'o and his cabinet and MCS too, sometimes last month, and I told him the same thing. So even if you get the all money from national government, from donors under conditional grants, you will still not pay the pending bills. Pending bills for counties were created by counties using OSR to just fill the gap so that it looks like they're having a balanced budget. So what advice would you give counties to clear these 165? If they were to go the first charge way you are talking about, then it means they have to stop spending on anything, including paying doctors and pay the contractors. That's what we're saying. The other fundamental thing that you need to look at, especially for the counties, is and even the national government, the realism of the fiscal responsibility principles. The fiscal responsibility principles are in law. They talk about wage to revenue, development to recurrent. Now, this week we're having a National Wage Bill conference. 12 years since the enactment of the PFM Act. And the reason why we have that conference is because national government is spending 46% of our revenue on wages. Well, the law says that the government committed to spend 35%. So the question is the realism of those fiscal responsibility principle. The other one is the issue, especially for counties, is the issue of those realism with regards to our devolution system. Our devolution system is very unique. Number one, our devolution system was meant to deliver services. It was not a devolution system which was meant to do buildings, brick and mortar. So the question then would be, I am a governor, you are a governor, and you are told you must spend 30% on development. Most counties are spending, of course, about 50 on salaries. Well, under the COFOG system of classification of government functions, if any expenditure on health, on agriculture, those are not development under that kind of functions. So you're telling the governor continue building. So what is happening currently, and we have the data to show that, is that the number of doctors in counties has reduced even before devolution, some categories of doctors. Hostels were built, but the governors cannot employ because when they come to health committee in the Senate, the Governor Mandago, who is the chair, will ask them, why are you not employing doctors? That is during the budget implementation. When they go back now during audit and reporting, my senator, who is the chairman of CPAC, will be asking them, why are you spending 50% on recurrent? So we really need to look at that, whether those fiscal responsibility principles, 35, 30 on development, really is applicable to the role of counties as per our constitution. Because even if you buy vehicles for stops, you buy equipment, they are not classified as development under the COVAX system classification. So that creates a very big challenge for our governors to employ. There is a gap, but they can't employ, because if you employ, auditors will tell you have exceeded that level of spending. So basically, those are the comments. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Indeed, very insightful. On one hand, the color is blue. On the other hand, the color is red. And the key issue there is budget credibility, fiscal responsibility principles. How best can we get this working for us? All said and done, we as citizens, this is our budget. This is my budget, this is your budget. What can we do about it? John, my colleague, the next question, very topical issue, but in no more than 2 minutes. Considering the ongoing doctor strike related to salary disputes, what does this mean for the 2024-2025 coming budget for government? What reforms can be put in place to avoid such disputes in future?
Thank you so much, Ruth. Number one is we should protect what we refer as essential services and poor sectors. And healthcare is one category of the sector that is targeting the poor and the vulnerable, particularly when it comes to the delivery of public health services in the public health facilities. I can tell you that a sizable number of people in this room have at least 2 forms of health insurance. So that if they go to a public health facility and it's not serving them, they have an option of going to a private health facility and get served. And we know how costly healthcare is in the private health facilities. Majority of the poor people pay for healthcare from their pocket, out-of-pocket spending, which is very costly. Our CEO at IPF made something that we are one medical bill from being declared bankrupt. That if that medical bill comes, even one CS section in the private health service you deliver, how much is that? It's over 200,000. Tell me how many Kenyans can pay 200,000 out of pocket.
if you have insurance, like IPF has given us insurance, we look at maternity, people at IPF, even those who have not considered that. So it's not a financial barrier because you have a provision maternity there that can comfortably go to hospital, be there, and walk out with a bundle of joy without the worries about you being retained there because of issues of payment. So when we are doing fiscal consolidation, we have sectors that we cannot afford to cut government spending, and one of them is healthcare. But what happens? In the last 5 years, we have seen that the budget for the health sector has been declining in real terms, and actually has declined by over 15% in real terms. Nominal, it appears it is growing. Like now we have seen the ceiling of 147 billion, which is a 4% or 8 billion increment, but in real terms, it is 0.2% increase. And this is the only time that we are having an increment. For the last 5 years, it has been declining. When you take consideration of how many, the population growth in terms of per capita spending, in terms of new medical interns who are graduating, who needs to be posted, the number is increasing. When you divide that by the budget that is being available, it is small. It cannot have. So we want that evidence to be used. Even when Parliament is approving the ceilings and when it's allocated, we need that evidence that what is the per capita spending. Per capita spending in the health sector has declined from about 5,000 in 2019, 5,000 Kenya shillings, to 4,000 in 2023. So which means we cannot be able to provide adequate healthcare service delivery, especially even at a time when we are having a commitment of new UHC. And when you look at medical interns, this is a thorn issue in the medical, in the current strike. The doctors are stuck. On the other hand, they're saying we need 206. That's, and the government is saying, hold on, this is not possible. What are the experts saying? We, the experts, are saying that what do the numbers say? The medical interns have been earning this money. Even those in the system, that is what they are earning. 15 years ago, medical interns earned 78,000. And now they're being offered 70,000. Adam Smith, considered as the father of economics, said that the wages are sticky downwards. If any employer attempts to reduce salaries, trade unions, employees, motivation and all that, you know what that will happen? Cut my salary. My employer, if you cut my salary by 90% today, what do you think will be my performance, honestly? So even if we have to consider this, we have to put it in what context. We're saying that you want to pay these guys less than what they were paid 15 years ago. What will happen to their performance? Those who are already in the system, their allowances and remunerations are not going to be revised downwards. You're going to have huge disparities between those who just entered the other day at 200, the one that has just entered now, they're the same, they were year mates and all that, at 70,000. So what does that mean? So how much is affordable? Right. So what do I say here? Where do we get the money? Because the government is saying, it's not a bad thing, but where is the money? I can give them a hint where to get the money and settle this. Actually, they have done a good in bringing down the dollar from 160 to 129, 130. Bernard, who handles our debt work, we had a budget for debt service. Half of our debt service, our debt portfolio is external, which is dollar denominated. And just by strengthening the shilling by about 25% from exchange rate of 160 to 130, we have freed resources, about 200 to 250 billion that was to be spent on debt service. That is more than twice the budget that is there for health sector. We can see some savings. Electricity, IPRA, we have seen fuel has come down. That multiplier effect of strengthening of the shilling has come with a lot of goodies. That is just one area that we can harness and have more resources and see how to balance and ensure that our doctors are back. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And now over to you, Cuba, from International Budget Partnership, on the final reflection, particularly the concern on the low absorption rates. We have seen from the figures presented that even when resources are allocated, in many instances, we have seen that budget allocation across the sectors remains below par. We have, budget allocation sometimes as low as 35%, some sectors performing at around 50, 60%. The very good performance would go to around 90-something%. What can be done about this? Particularly, how can we encourage citizen participation in monitoring progress and holding authorities accountable for efficiently utilizing development budgets?
Thank you for your question. I think I'll try and answer it in 2 minutes. So perhaps on what can be done to enhance budget credibility, I think if you look at the county level, pending bills is not a problem in itself, right? It's a symptom of a problem. So if you look at, the accumulation of county pending bills at the county level, it's a symptom of a problem with OSR projections, as has been mentioned, but also OSR collection generally, right? So, and we can go into the specifics of those, but I do believe that some of the challenges with budget credibility at both the national and county level have to do with financing as opposed to expenditure, because there's a link between the two. So if you don't collect money, the national government has not been able to, has under-collected revenue by about 6% on average for the past 5 years. The question is, where did that 6% that was budgeted for come from, right? So then you have a challenge with implementation, because now you can't spend as you had planned. So services aren't delivered, and then you have a never-ending cycle in that respect. And now when you have pending bills, you also have an issue of, pending bills are money that was supposed to go to contractors, right? So those contractors, there's a liquidity issue there, so they don't have as much finance as they're supposed to, but also they sometimes now default on payments to, like tax payments, right? So for example, one of the things we saw at the end of last year was a sudden surge in revenue towards the very last weeks of the year. And it was because of the clearing of some pending bills, which caused businesses to pay their corporate income tax. So it's a systemic issue in terms of budget credibility, but on what citizens can do, I believe there's a sense in which the public and the government can meet in the middle on how citizens can get involved and how these budgeting processes can be inclusive and budgets can be responsive to the needs of people. So on the part of the public, I think it's our responsibility to actually educate ourselves on these processes, and so that we're not casualties and we're not kind of looking back on decisions and say, hey, who decided that when, right? So I think a lot of Kenyans in April of last year discovered that there was a finance bill when they found out that there were a lot of new taxes, including on beauty products, which I think a lot of people, and digital assets and all kinds of proposals. So I think there's a role of the public in kind of getting engaged and caring, to be honest, about both political and economic policy issues. Also in government, there's a role in creating inclusive public participation opportunities and engagement of citizens, right? And this is both at the national and county level. So thinking about how do we make these engagements more inclusive and have feedback, for example, on public participation, because that has led to a degree of apathy, where you spend an entire week working on a memorandum, you've done your analysis, you've gone on YouTube to find videos on how to do analysis, and then you present your views, and when you look at the budget, there's no feedback, this was incorporated, there's no, we acknowledge your feedback. So that's something that both levels of government can improve. And even when you look at the kind of information in budget documents that's included by county governments through our county budget transparency survey that we do each year on county budget documents, you find that the information on public participation is routinely the lowest level, the lowest amount of information. And so we believe that that's one way that the government could meet the public in the middle. And I think the role for civil society is to encourage both towards meeting in the middle and in that way contributing to a more inclusive and participatory democracy for Kenya at large. I believe I'll leave it there.
Indeed. Thank you very much, colleagues and friends, for the insightful discussions in our panel discussion. As we take our seats back, I request that we give them a round of applause for the insights that they have shared. Asanteni. Indeed, we have learnt a lot, and we do make a commitment as the Institute of Public Finance to engage with our partners and our institutions to advance the recommendations and the insights from the report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and colleagues and team. I think we need to give them a round of applause. This has been a thought-provoking discussion. I wanted to come here and say where. I think from here, we are moving to Parliament. We sit down with this discussion and have these recommendations taken up. Thank you. I want to now welcome, I know the program says it's an opportunity for question and answer. We will have that session at the end. But right now, allow me to welcome our founder and CEO, James Moragori, to come and help us welcome our chief guest. A clap for James as he comes.
Thank you, Rosalia, and our chief guest, our partners, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Rosalia has said that we go to Parliament, so I want to take you straight to Parliament. And allow me to invite Honorable Miriam Mase to come and make her key remarks. Thank you very much. Karibu sana mheshimiwa.
The Institute of Public Finance, all the partners and stakeholders present, all protocols observed. Good morning. You've been told my name is Miriam Mase. I represent the great people of Teso South, and I'm also the Vice Chair, Budget and Appropriations Committee. I must say I'm honored. I was coming here as an ordinary participant, representing KEOPA, but I've been bestowed with a very honorable title in this event, chief guest of the event. I want to say I feel honored and thank you so much. This is indeed very timely, very, very timely. I think for the last 2 weeks, this has been the discussion in our committee. We've been in Mombasa, meeting various stakeholders, control of budget, auditor general, governor of central bank, in fulfilling one of our mandates. Indeed, as the budget committee, one of our main budget is to investigate, inquire into, and report on all matters related to coordination and monitoring of the budget. And of course, among others, we also discuss and review the estimates. We also examine the BPS, which we just finished. So we are now approaching the second stage of the budget preparation, budget making process. So this is very timely. We will learn a lot. I've listened to the presentations. Thank you for the very insightful, detailed, and very educative presentation. And I think I remember telling Mercy, we need to have this presentation before the entire budget committee. I think it would be very, very, very helpful. So I'll just make a few remarks. And I want to pick it from the presentation by the second presenter, who gave us some pictures of a father covering himself and leaving the child exposed. And the other one of a father having an umbrella and not making use of it. And you say that Parliament has a responsibility. Indeed, our committee has a responsibility. We need to protect the vulnerable. We also need to make sure that there is value for money. So that is one of the key issues we look at. Even when we look at bills, all money bills have to come before the budget committee. We're looking at the value for money. And therefore, how we apply our resources indeed really matters. So your report the shadow budget report, I like the fact that it takes an innovative approach by highlighting crucial questions regarding the budget efficiency and effectiveness that Parliament, civil society organizations, and advocates should ask when performing their oversight roles. And indeed, all oversight institutions, we need to ask these questions. So your document also introduces a new chapter on physical decentralization, which lays the groundwork for future work to explore county budgets in general. And when we were looking at this budget performance, indeed, we looked at the challenges. We did, and these are some of the concerns that you people have also raised. As much as our role is, we focus on appropriating expenditure side, we must also ask ourselves where is the money coming from. In Parliament, we have 3 committees. We have the budget, we're looking at appropriating the money. We have the finance committee that looks at where the money is going to come from. Then, of course, we have the debt committee that deals with the debt. So we observed that actually the economy has underperformed. Revenue, KRF fell short of its collections. And among other challenges, delays that you've just enumerated here, delays in exchequer releases, low absorption, the pending bills issue, the issue of duplication, and many others. And when you are presenting on a pending bills, actually I wanted to pose a question. Probably you could advise us. You know, pending bills has become chronic, let's just call it chronic, continuously accumulating. We have lost contractors in this country. The people have gotten into depression, committed suicide, because some of them borrowed loans from banks. So maybe probably for us to effectively address the issue of pending bills, we first need to understand what is causing pending bills. Some of the reasons we've been given is delayed exchequer releases. Some of the reasons we've been given are unrealistic revenue projections. So counties fell short of their collections. But also some of the reasons are counties requisition for money for specific expenditure items, but once they receive the money, they pay completely different expenditure items, some that may not even have been budgeted for. So how are we going to deal with issues like that? Because if it is legislation, we are not short of legislation. Circulars have been sent. Some monies have even ever been ring-fenced, but we still continue to accumulate pending bills. So what is going to be the solution to the issue of pending bills? Probably you will advise us on what else we can do around that area. Also on duplication. That was also a concern that we also raised. It's not only the water sector. Even when you go to social protection, look at all the categories. We have the Women Enterprise, we have the Hustler Fund, we have the WESO Fund, we have the Youth Enterprise Fund. It's a lot of duplication. Some of those monies, we don't even know how it is being tracked. We were telling the Auditor General to help us track and advise and tell us what is the impact to the nation in terms of all these individual funds, and maybe make recommendations. Probably we need to collapse some of these funds together so that we can have better impact. So I want to say that you have done a very good analysis. The sectoral analysis reveals some notable concerns, including weak performance reporting frameworks in some sectors that compromise accountability and a performance in key performance indicators, even when the absorption rates are high. And you've just raised the case in county governments, where there is need for proper legal framework, we need revenue collection systems which should be harmonized across counties. Because right now we go to counties, even the revenues, the taxes, they're all different. Every county is charging their own, yet we are in one country. A Kenyan should feel free in knowing, and it should be able to plan. You know that even if you moved to Nakuru County to start a business, or you came to Nairobi, or you went to Busia, you're going to pay similar taxes. So you can plan, you can organize yourself. And the other area also, your report underscores the critical importance of directing attention towards education, law, health, agriculture sectors to foster sustained economic growth. And within the education sector, it advocates for the merging of governance and standards program to facilitate more efficient resource allocation, alongside a call to leverage research and innovation in technical and vocational education, the TVETs, and universities to bolster resource generation. I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses, so I'm struggling to. That is, we're going to take in the recommendations that you have made. And even in health, you've made reference to the issue of equipments. That's also another area we discussed at length. And some of the reasons were being given why the leasing program never performed so well, because there are some counties who never even operationalized some machinery. It's because it was not well, we did not prepare for that program properly. In some counties, they did not have the staff, the personnel, trained personnel to operationalize the machines or even to service the machines. So for an entire 5 years, machines were leased and they were not utilized. And the people continue to go seek for services in private sectors. I think that is why that program was being reviewed to see whether we continue with it or we do away with that particular program. Going forward, I think we should have more of these engagements, involve us, and especially at a time like this, like I've said, we will definitely incorporate your views in our reports, in our figures as we review and amend the figures, so that we reflect what actually needs to be captured. So thank you so much. I don't want to take so much of your time. Most of the issues have been discussed. I do not want to belabor and to continue to repeat. I thank you. But I would suggest that you send to Mercy the presentations. I will share with the budget committee in our group. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mary. And as we go to the next part, which is the official launch of the annual national shadow budget. I want to make just 5 key points with regards to this time when we are launching this shadow budget. One of them is on the debt pressure. We headed media when we expected to pay the remaining $500 million, around 60 billion out of the maturing Eurobond. The pressure on our debt, we still remain a debt-distressed economy, and that's something that needs to be considered by parliamentary committees as we engage in the next budget. The private sector lending, still, while it's starting to progressively peak, and we've seen the central bank, the previous monetary policy committee, maintain the rate at 13%, the private sector lending is still not at where we need to take it as a country. And so there's need for government to make the right investments around this time in the coming budget. The next thing is economic growth projections. In the projections for this year, we're talking about 5% growth. How realistic that in terms of fiscal consolidation times is not clear. And so as we think about economic projection, it's very important that we consider fiscal consolidation not in the vulnerable sectors so that we attain economic growth. We have to ask ourselves, which are sectors that we need to cut and which one do we need to propel? The next item, in this, in times, budgeting in terms of fiscal consolidation, is also the question around budgeted corruption. Majorly, our budget is highly affected by corruption because we have contractor-driven items on the budget, not necessarily for service delivery, not for delivering services to taxpayers, but to line up pockets for those who are keen and intent on freezing us as a country. That's something that, difficult questions that parliamentary committees need to ask during the interrogation of the budget. And finally, it's time we move to full fiscal decentralization. We must move to full devolution in the coming year. A lot of reports have been done, and we are talking about more than 272 billion worth of functions that are still held by the national government. So it is important for that investment to be considered and to be transferred rightfully to where it belongs. And when these resources are moving, then the oversight institutions, the EACC, ODPP, Office of the Auditor General, need to be provided with more resources to support counties with regards to oversight, because we must oversight these resources. However, even as we think about oversight at the county level, we must think about oversight at the national level. We only take to the counties approximately 400 billion, including conditional grants. We are leaving approximately 3.2 trillion to be spent at the national level. So how well are we oversighting these resources? These are the questions that we need to ask, and ask very clearly, even as we go to the next financial year, 2024-2025. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I want to take this back to Rosalia. Asante.
Thank you so much, James, for the insights that we have picked, that we are following up as we have been given that directive by our chief guest, that from here, back. Thank you. So I had said that we're going to open up a session for Q&A. If we have any questions, you might want clarifications, and this goes to also our online guests. Clarifications, questions, we're giving you a few minutes to ask your questions. We've had so much. Findings, recommendations. Those that are joining us online, you can share your comment, your question, your clarification. We will address it. Thank you. There's a question on our right. Thank you. Please tell us your name.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Mirangi from Thinkwell. And thank you so much, everyone who has presented and spoken. I just need to ask a few questions. The first one is on the health budget. And from what I saw is that the BPS ceilings have an increase of about 8 billion shillings. And I'm curious to find out that 8 billion shillings, is it really specific towards the new social health insurance? Because then I have seen on the abridged report that actually that increase is at the development budget stage. And in fact, the recurrent budget for the Ministry of Health looks like it has reduced. So I'm curious to find out what is the thinking around the allocation of funds to actualize the primary healthcare fund it's a long name, the ECCF, the Emergency Chronic Illness Fund that is going to be funded by the national government. Then the other thing is about a pronouncement, and I think this was in the news, that the executive made, saying that there would be a reduction in the national budget by 500 billion so that we can live within our means. I don't know whether that has been factored in or is going to be factored in the budget policy statement that is currently in Parliament. And then on the last issue is regarding the share that the counties are getting. And based on the analysis, the 2024-2025 budget is proposing about 13% share of the national revenues of the national revenues to counties. And I think somewhere, if I'm not wrong, the Constitution talks about 15%. So will that then bring a bit of challenge between the national government and the county governments that may then force, or that there could have, that would be a delay in the signing of the Division of Revenue Bill? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Eric. I think we'll take all the questions, then we'll address it to some of our experts in the room. Any other question? And if a question is addressed to you, kindly note it down because we will respond to it. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Gordon Kachola. Following the presentation by Joash and Cube on particularly pending bills, that is where eyebrows are raised. A presenter says on pending bills, actually, it's uncurable as it is. Cuba says on matters pending bills, it's simply because money doesn't follow functions. And here we have functions that are not fully devolved. Where do we therefore draw the line? Because as the Member of Parliament has said, Honorable Mary, that at least we keep losing contractors. These are human beings, they're not just statistics. They're fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. Where is the weakness? Where must we tighten the nose? Because at some point, something has to be done. Is it a matter of legislation? Is it a matter of someone sitting somewhere deliberately ignoring to do what they're supposed to do in terms of paying those bills or in terms of devolving the funds? Can the funds follow the functions? And if these very, very functions are again duplicated, clearly it shows there is laxity either in lawmaking or something is not adding up. And I think the two plus the Honorable Member may help us unravel this mystery. Where is the laxity? How then do we move forward as a country? Because in the end, we got to find solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon. I don't think there is any other question. Please be looking at the people who are joining us online to see if there are any questions or comments that are coming through so that we can address all of them. I would want to give the first question to John Nyangi that was addressed to you on matters health.
Thanks, Eric, for the question. When we look at where the beneficiaries of these increments are, mostly this is in the program on
Excuse me, please turn for the cameras.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Now is good? Oh, okay. The maternal, reproductive, neonatal, and child health is the greatest beneficiary of these increments. And that's why we're saying that we're seeing more resources being set aside for primary health care. That's why we're concluding the shadow budget that, okay, we see deliberate actions towards giving more priority to the primary health care. And specifically whether there is resources put aside for supporting the social health insurance, supporting the emergency, chronic, and illness going into that particular fund, we put a question there, because with all those new reforms that are bringing increased needs for expenditure for primary healthcare fund, for expenditure for that emergency chronic fund, we do not see substantive allocation for funds to improve that. And it is expected that the money to support that will come from the social health insurance contributions. And on whether the reduction that the president has made a pronouncement to reduce the budget, whether that is possible, if you take over that 500 billion out of it, reducing the budget from 4.2 trillion to 3 trillion, that is more than removing the whole development budget, because the other areas are very hard to cut. Recurrent, operations and maintenance, salaries, wages, allowances, they have been sticky. Attempts have been made to cut those ones, but they end up not succeeding. So I don't think that will be an uphill task to try to reduce that budget by amount that is more than what's allocated for the entire development budget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nyangi. Our CEO, James, you would want to respond to some of the questions. We have a question that came in on budget allocations, and another one that came in for the share of allocations to counties. From Eric.
Yeah, I think the question on allocation, primarily, even if it's within the health sector, where we figure it out as IPF, there's no problem where the money will go. It's just a question of prioritization. How are we going to prioritize these resources? If we have 8 billion increase, but we're saying we don't know whether there was allocation for medical equipment, for example. And so if there is, then it only means that the ministry only gets an extra 1 billion. But then can that cover all the demands that we are seeing, especially when it comes like now when we have a crisis within the public health sector? So I think that's, for me, is the way I would look at it. But I think part of the propositions we've made is this, an opportunity to engage with the parliamentary committees as part of the work we are going to take forward with this shadow budget. Because essentially, it's a shadow budget to be able to reflect what will be able, what was being presented through the BPS, all the way within the budget process, from the budget review and outlook paper, all the way to the BPS, the implementation reports that we've seen, and now the estimates that we expect to come to Parliament, by the end of the month. And then we can interrogate, we can interact with the sectoral committees and the sector players, and then we can be able to further question this conversation through. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, James. I would want to address the last question that came to Josh and Cuba on pending bills and whether there's a solution there.
Here comes stand next to you. So the issue of pending bills, not to say that it's uncurable, but it's going to take a lot of effort, right? And it's a multifaceted problem, which means that the effort is going to have to come from many quarters. So firstly, of course, counties have work to do, right? There are reforms and active things that counties can do to improve their own on-source revenue collection, including, one, having more credible projections in terms of what counties actually expect to collect. Two, automating these processes, and actually there's also a role for National Treasury there in helping counties to standardize the automation of revenue, to enhance now revenue collection and the fidelity of those processes. There's also a role for the legislature at both county and national level. If we were going radical, the National Assembly, the National Assembly Budget and Appropriations Committee could say that, we're not producing another report until we get a report on the full devolution of functions, right? It could be as simple as that. But I think something that's perhaps more practical is continuous raising of the issue of devolution of functions and full sharing and clarity on what the different levels of government are expected to do and how the finance is actually going to facilitate those functions. Finally, I also think there's an important role for, or second to last, for the intergovernmental bodies and the different committees that are there. We've talked about the IGTRC, we've talked about the Commission on Revenue Allocation, and the extent to which their recommendations are actually realized in practice. And I think it's still within their power to actually continue to raise these issues. And finally, there's citizens, right? And I think citizens do play an important role in raising these issues and pushing for this full devolution of functions, because again, it can be very confusing when you go to a county government public participation and you ask for, a new police post here, right? Or next to your village, but you realize that that's not a county government function. Or you ask for, we would like community health promoters in our area, and then the county government will be like, okay, yes, that's within our mandate, but they were also expecting 50% of that funding for the community health promoters from the national government. So again, this is intertwined. So I think there's a lot that can be done from many different actors and from many different angles. And it may take us a while, also considering that we are in a constrained financial position with the public debt obligations, among other things. But I do believe it's possible and that we will achieve it over time. I think we have to believe that.
Thank you. Cuba, you want to give a follow-up or?
Thank you very much. I think the issue of pending bill, as I indicated before, is not a new issue to us. It's an historical issue. And we have to look at it from two perspectives: the historical perspective and the futuristic. Because what happens is, as counties and national government struggles to pay the past pending bills, some contractors are owed as late as 2013, 2014. What mechanisms do we need to put in place to ensure that we don't incur more? Because this spending bill, when you talk about 165, you realize when you break it down year by year, you realize in this year, the pending bill was 2 billion. Then the last year, next year it went to it went down by 200. The following year it goes up. So it's something that has taken a cyclical pattern, goes up and down, goes up and down. So how do you stop that movement? Number one, of course, is the issue of budget credibility that I've talked about. We have to tell the governors and the county CECs for finance that their OSR projections doesn't make sense. And I've told them before, because they are using OSR as a plug-in tool to make sure they balance the budget, because they know if you present a budget, of course budget has got two sides, the spending and the income side. If you take a budget which does not it's not fully financed, then the county assembly will reject it, and of course the control budget will also not approve it. So the realism of our budgets. The other issue, of course, are legislative approaches. I am sure and I'm aware in Parliament we have had one of the bill which has been circulating for over 10 years called Prompt Payment Bill. It was one of the major bill in the BBA that was brought down. One of the keywords that bill was providing for was not just institutional responsibility, but also individual accountability of the accounting officers, so that you're held accountable. If you don't pay a supply within 90 days, which as was proposed by that bill, then of course the institution suffers. But you as an individual, as the accounting officer, you also need to take responsibility so that people are held responsible. But anyway, it comes also to issues of credibility. We know that we moved into what we call the program-based budget over 10 years ago. So the program-based budget is just by name, not by action. So the budget will come in terms of program end of this month, but going forward, the implementation is itemized. And this is why the control budget is saying is giving approvals, but the monies are being misapplied, because the budget with the control of budget is program-based, but the requisition and everything, exchequer releases, are itemized. And the controller of budget can only see what happens at the CRF, at the consolidated fund, not what happens at the individual banks. Probably the treasury single account may solve that. We are moving to treasury single accounts, but you also need to empower the controller of budget to not just see what is in consolidated fund and the CRF, but also see what is happening in the commercial bank accounts, where you're approving money for paying for contractor for roads. The money is diverted to pay other things. There was a year, I think this financial year, if not last financial year, Senate
graciously increased the ceiling, the recurrent ceiling for county assemblies. I think by almost 2 billion, because county allocation and revenue bill has got a provide ceiling for county assemblies, and that money was specifically to address pending bills. I can shock you that some counties still misapplied that money, which was a support to them from national government to pay pending bills in other areas. So they still have issues of pending bills. So what I'm saying, we need to be credible in the way you are doing our budget, legislative reforms, but also we need to be responsible public servants where I serve, because the people who are doing these things are not the governor, who are misapplying are not the governor, they're technical officers like me and my colleagues at the counties.
Thank you so much, Josh. Yes. So we are getting to the climax of this day, where we want to go and launch our annual shadow budget 2024-2025. So I kindly ask the gentleman from IPF to help me set up this space. And as we do that, there is a burning response that is coming from one of our research analysts, lead research analyst Bernard, who wants to clarify a point. So I want to give him an opportunity as our gentleman set up the stage for the launch.
Thanks, Rosalia. There was that question about 13% revenue being allocated to the counties. But as per our analysis, currently the allocation is at 23%, because you are supposed to use the last audited and approved account, which is for the year 2019-2020. So that's the clarification I want to give. Thank you.
Gentlemen, once more, allow me to request that we move it to where our banner is. We remove the podium and have the dummy there so that we can be able to get all our IPF logos and identity, because we have been told we are the Institute of Great Minds when it comes to public finance. So why not identify ourselves as such? So as we do that, we are preparing to have the launch. We need energy, so kindly let's stand up. We've been seated for quite some time. Our media team, you know how we do it. We usually follow it up with a bit of song. As we are setting up, let us stand up, let us stretch a bit. Allow me to give you an exercise to stretch a bit, because as we set it up,
Media team, kindly give us our song. And if you don't like that song, you can tell us you don't like that song. for a minute. We close our meeting. Apologies for the table that we... Let's take our seat for a minute or two. So thank you. Thank you so much. We take our seats for a minute, and I'm giving it to Ruth Kendogor, who opened, and now she's closing our meeting. And if she can, she will pray for us.
Our distinguished guests today, partners, colleagues, friends, including our friends from the media, good morning once again. I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you very much. Asante sana for making time to be with us. It has indeed been an incredible morning, sharing insights, getting to know each other, getting to share the findings from our report, getting to hear your perspectives and to discuss this, and we do not take it for granted. We sincerely appreciate your presence here today, and we do hope that this is just the first step or one of the steps that we are taking towards building synergy in moving forward and navigating the dynamic PFM landscape. We welcome and indeed look forward to sustained dialogue between our institutions today here, including those who are not here today, particularly on this report, the shadow budget, the annual national shadow budget for financial year 2024-2025.